be bitter and depressed. That's
5, page 26. We've been
Giving more?
dealing with spills in the refrigerator, and we're not going to talk about Carmouche. In the last, 6 months that we've been learning Isser V'Heter, we've learned that normally there is absorption of a prohibited flavor only through transfer of heat, right? If you have a cold piece of meat on a cold milchdik plate, there's no transfer. You just do hadach of the plate, you wash off the meat, and there's no problem. It's only with heat, yad soletisbo, that there's transfer either of a dvar isser, if it touches a dvar heter, and then it might be usser k'dei klipa only where they touched. Sometimes if it's a very fatty piece, it'll usser the whole piece, but it's usually with heat. Now we've also said that if we have a knife, which and you cut something that's charif, so the combination of the duchka de sak, even though it's cold, the combination of duchka de sakina and the charifut of what you're cutting will transfer a flavor as well, even without heat. So now, because we're talking about spills in the refrigerator, we're going to talk about the concept of kavush. Kavush means pickling. So occasionally, milk may occasionally spill onto a meat dish in the refrigerator without the person's knowledge and remain there for a significant amount of time before it is dealt with. Although one would think that the same rules should apply in this case as well, there is another important halachic principle of kashrus that may apply here, known as kavush kimavusha. A food that is soaked is considered as if it were cooked. Now, the source of this principle can be found a few lines earlier in the same passage in Gemara Psachim, Omar Shmuel. Remember, there we talked about a bird that fell into mayonnaise. And remember, we said if it was cold, we dealt with it. Are we talking about if it's cold? Are we talking about it's hot? So we said that we have different opinions, but it's mainly lenient if it's cold and there's no absorption, unless it's got cracks in it or unless it's spicy. Now, here, Amar Shmuel says, Maliyach harehu kuroseach. When you salt something, it's like you boiled it. Now, this is not regular maliyach. Maliyach here will be sheer malicha. You got to put a tremendous amount of salt, as if you were going to salt a piece of meat to remove the blood, and it's got to stay on for at least 18 minutes. So maliyach, something that's very salted, and if it touches something that's usser, or you have a piece of meat and a piece of milk that are salted in this fashion, there can be transfer of taste. Like roseach. Says the Gemara kavush, also harehu kamavushal. It's like you cooked it. Now we have to define kavush. According to Shmuel, a cold food that is soaked for an extended period of time in liquid. You take a cold hot dog and you put it into milk, into a bowl of cold milk, may still create a transfer of taste, despite the fact that cold foods normally do not transfer flavor, except for a davar charif, like we said by a duchka de sakin. Thus, a kosher food that is soaked within a non-kosher liquid or brine, or let's say you have a non-kosher, you have pig juice, right? Juice that emanated from a pig piece, a piece of meat. And you take a kosher piece of meat, you soak it in that liquid. Or a non-kosher fish liquid. Or basar b'chalav, right? Like a piece of meat that's soaked cold, that sits in a bowl of milk, will be prohibited. And the same applies to a meat dish that soaks in milk, or a kosher utensil soaking in a non-kosher liquid. So this also doesn't just apply to the food. This could be, you have a plate that soaks in something more than 24 hours. There'll be a transfer of belia to the plate. So it seems for the Gemara in Psachim that this transfer of taste that occurs in the case of kavush is considered to be deraisa. in most cases of non-kosher or prohibited foods. So that's when we're talking about, let's say, treifus, chazer, nevela, yayin nesach. However, with regard to basar b'chalav, the isser is only d'rabbanan. Where do we see that? Rabbanan, mi basar b'chalav lo gamrinan. We can't learn out from basar b'chalav to other isurim. The chidush who? My chidush. The Gemara goes through what's the chidush. But because basar is permitted and chalav is permitted, now you mix them. All of a sudden it's asr. That's the chidush. But the Gemara, the Tzurba left it out. Ella, the itarule kuliyama b'chal ba'ashari. That if you soak meat in milk all day, it's permitted by Torah law. But bashale b'shule. But if you cook the meat in milk, even for a minute, it's asr by Torah law. Now, so according to the Gemara, basar b'chalav is only forbidden when cooked together. Therefore, the principle of kavush does not apply on a doraisa level. It will be if it sits in sheer. We'll see what sheer kavush is soon. Normally, sheer kavush is going to be 24 hours, me'es le'es, in standard situations. And the fact that it's only Rabbanon is pointed out by the Beis Yosef on his commentary to the Tur in Siman Kufay. Because of Arosh, b'shamati b'shem ritzvah, the imshah b'tocho yom shalim me'es le'es nikra kavush. If something soaks in something, es le'es means 24 hours, it's considered pickled. Ubolea upolit k'mavushel. It will release its flavor and it will absorb a flavor as if you cooked it. V'raya midamrina b'chulin basar b'chalav chidushu. The itari le'kuli yom b'chal b'shari. If you soak a piece of meat in milk cold a whole day, it's permitted. V'bashal le'aser. Umay chidushu kol yisur shebetor nami dinam kach. The tzon, all other isurim, like nevela, chazer, the tzon and bitzon and lo mitzvah lo bola, that normally cold and cold, it doesn't answer one or the other, it doesn't absorb. Elavada is echidusha. The chol isurim shebetor afal gav the tzon and dinam kach, the tzon and bitzon lo mitzvah lo bola. Elavada zer chidusha the chol isurim shebetor afal gav the tzon and bitzon lo bola im sharu yom shalem nesru mitam kov. The chidush by all other isurim, treifus, nevela, yayin nesech, is that if it soaks for 24 hours, it becomes asr, even though it's cold. But rabbinically, it'll be asr, but not midorais. Now, how long must, let's say we're starting off with a solid piece of meat, a hot dog, a piece of steak, cold. How long must the solid be soaked in liquid in order to be considered kavush? Although the first passage in the Gemara Pesachim did not specify directly, the Beis Yosef derives that the time frame for soaking must be a minimum of 24 hours in order to be considered kavush, as the Gemara refers to being soaked for an entire day. However, the Beis Yosef later on quotes the Rosh, who argues that the amount of time needed to achieve the state of kavush is much less with regard to a liquid with a sharp taste such as brine. Rabbi Forst in the laws of kashrus holds that if you soak in something like brine, the kavush action takes place within either 18 or possibly even 6 minutes. So if the prohibited liquid is brine, is very charif, then the transfer of the prohibited taste could occur even as short as 6 to 18 minutes. Says the Beis Yosef, kavush b'tzir. Tzir is fish brine. So let's say it's a non-kosher fish and it's very salty. Because of arosh, b'soper kol habasar, v'shir hava ki'ilu nosnu al ha'or k'dei sheyirtach v'yatchil l'bashel. It's the amount of time that it takes to put a dish, a pot on the fire, and it begins to boil. Well, it takes anywhere between 6 and 18 minutes to do so. The Shulchan Aruch quotes the rule of kavush k'mavushel as the halacha, and accepts the definition of the period of soaking as being at least 24 hours. Isur shenishra im heter. You have something prohibited that soaks in something permitted. let's say a piece of treif meat that soaks in kosher milk. If it's meis leis b'tzorin, even though it's only cold, but it's 24 hours, make recovery. Bareu k'mavushel v'nesar kul. Everything becomes usher. The milk becomes usher. Aval pochus mikan ba'adachas santi. Now, we're not talking about use of milk here, but let's say you soaked a piece of kosher meat in a prohibited liquid less than 24 hours. All you have to do is wash it off. So the carmouche process has to be 24 hours. The Ramah adds that it's a machlokas whether carmouche applies if part of the solid food is not soaked in the liquid. Think about an iceberg. Let's say a piece of the meat is sticking above the fluid. The Ramah rules that and also the Ramah rules that if it's a sofek, whether the thing was there for 24 hours, right? It's uncertain whether the solid food was in fact soaking in liquid for 24 hours. One may be lenient specifically in cases of basar b'challah. Because as we learned, basar b'challah, the whole inyan of kavush is only rabbanon. So safek rabbanon is lakula. If it would be not basar b'challah, then if it's a safek, we'd have to lean l'chum. Says the Ramah v'chol mokum damir and kavush k'mavushel. Whenever we have this case of kavush k'mavushel, afilu mashachutz l'kvisha aser. Even the piece that's sitting above the liquid becomes aser. It's the whole piece. It sort of bubbles through. Like in cooking. We don't say when you cook something that only part of it becomes us, so the whole piece becomes us. He brings those that are lenient regarding the piece of meat that was not sitting in the liquid. The Safek kavush aser, milvadu basar im chala. If we're dealing with Isser, Treifis, Yayin Nesech, other Isurim, other prohibitions, then if it's a suffix, whether it was 24 hours or not, we go l'chumra. But if it's if it's a piece of meat that was soaking in milk, and you think it's less than 24 hours, it's a suffix, you can be lenient and just wash it off. Because Torah law says the only problem with basar b'challah is if you cook it. Remember, a cold piece of meat with a cold piece of cheese, when you eat that together, you are not violating an Isser D'Oraisa. You're violating an Isser D'Rabbanan, but it's not an Isser D'Oraisa. The only time it's Asr is when you cook it together. And then there's three lavim in basar b'challah. You get a lav just for cooking it. That's why you can't get a job at McDonald's, because if you get paid and you have hana in cooking basar b'challah, you don't eat it. You're not. There's an isser hana by basar b'challah, and there's also isser bishul. You cannot cook it. Now, if it's unkosher meat, we said it's not d'oraisa. Rabbanan, you also can't do it, and you can't eat basar b'challah, but that's basar b'challah that's been created basar b'challah through heat. Or through kvisha, beyond 24 hours. But as we've seen now, it's only drabana. Okay, the Shach rules that one may follow the lenient opinions of the first case of the Ramah, where some of the solid was not immersed in liquid, since the Ramah himself appears to be lenient in his other sefer Torah's Chatas. The Ramah, besides, of course, the Ramah that he writes in Shulchan Aruch, he wrote many other Sforim. One of his is Torah's Chatas, which has a lot of dinim of Isser V'Heter in it. Says the Shach there in Kufay, Yesh Makilin b'mashachutz l'tzir. If there was a big piece of the meat that was not soaking in the fish brine that was treif, then that piece of meat you could cut away, and that piece of meat would be okay. Now the Prima Godim clarifies that the state of coverage can only exist where the solid is truly solid and the liquid is truly liquid. So the solid can float in the liquid. But if both are solid but moist, they do not have the status of having been cooked together. Kvisha lo shayach el davar gush, which is something solid, the davar tzolol in a liquid. Mafli du mavli amizel is that. It's easy for flavors to go in and out. But lo b'shneim lachim shezem miyad yitarvu v'yesru zed zed. If they're both moist, so there'll be mixture right away. But v'lo b'shneim gushim, afshem lachim tzad. If you have two solid things, let's say a piece of meat and a piece of cheese that are solid, right? Lo b'shneim gushim afshem lachim tzad lo shayich kavayu kvisha. Afilu yandu yomim rabim. So the Prima Gadim says it's only if it's the solid is sitting mamish in a liquid. But if you have two solid items next to each other and they're only moist, then there's that kvisha doesn't occur even if they're together for many days. Vu b'tshuvas harosh, the Prima Gadim gives us a rosh. Shamavur imrach. If the meat is soft, sha'isra munach b'tochum etanev mokum kavush mikri. Then if there's liquid inside of it, it would be called kavush. So imamish have to have liquid with solid. Now, would the halacha of kavush apply to foods in the freezer, such as ice cream? According to the Sefer Noam halacha, the answer is no. Since ice cream is frozen and has the properties of a solid, therefore, if ice cream was mistakenly placed in a parve or meat container, it would not render the container dairy, and even if it was there for a long time. Because he says that's solid, not liquid. Says the Noam halacha kli, shayesham glida chalavit. If you have a meat kli that there was dairy ice cream sitting there, yoter michavdalit shos b'makfei, and it was in the freezer for more than 24 hours, right? It doesn't melt. I mean, once it melts, it becomes liquid. So then you'd have a problem. We're talking about it's in its frozen status. Ein kli din shel chalavi. So first of all, if the kli was a neutral kli, it doesn't become a milchta kli if you have some ice cream in that kli. Kevan shaglida yesh lo din yavish u'v'yavish ain't din kavush. And it would be the same thing if it was in a meat dish, it would not create a problem. Okay, now we get to ovens. An oven is one of the most important appliances necessary for cooking and is therefore critical to determine if and how one may use an oven for meat and dairy in a permissible manner according to halacha. Having two separate ovens is certainly the easiest solution halachically, as one can be designated for meat and the other for dairy. But many people are unable to have two ovens and must suffice with one. Is it permitted to use one oven for both meat and dairy? And if so, how is it done? There are a number of potential halachic issues with using an oven for both meat and dairy. But the primary one is that of zeya, which is usually translated as steam. If one cooks dairy and meat in the oven at the same time, the steam from one may circulate throughout the oven and be absorbed by the other. The question is whether steam, which is not actual tangible food, is considered halachically significant. According to the Tzurba Sarosh, the answer is yes. Shesha'alta al ilfis cholevet, you're making macaroni and cheese in a pan. Can you put it in the oven on the bottom, underneath a pot of meat which is above? Niralisha osir. Even b'di'evet. Afilu b'di'evet emas nasa. Hayiti osir hakadera. He would osir the meat pot. Ki hazeya, the steam, ha'olemina ilfis, that will come up, rise from the macaroni and cheese, hu k'mochalav. Kiditnan, prepared based on machshirin, merchat tmeya. Let's say there is a bathhouse and there is steam rising. Zay also tmeya. The zay is also tummy. Utahara b'chiyutam. That's that, and then utahara b'chiyutam. Now, if it's a tohar bathhouse, it depends on whether you're happy that the item got wet or not. That's the concept of chiyutam. Then he says, brecha shebabayis. There's a pool in your house. V'abayis mezia mechamosa, and it's a heated pool. And the house has steam from the heat of the pool. So im tmeya, if the pool was tameh because the sherets fell into it, zeya kol abayis shemachmosa tmeya. the steam that went everywhere in the house also transfers the tumah there. Based on that, he learns that the steam has halachic significance. Says the Rosh, normally, even though a man might be tamei, let's put it this way: perspiration, sweat, is not one of the liquids that is makabel, that will allow food to be makabel tumah. Let's say a person drank tamei dika water and he sweated. Also, zayasa tahara. His sweat, just because he becomes tamei through drinking the fluid, his zaya is not tamei. Now, if he has carried water dumped on him, and that water was tamei, they also tmeya. Even what he sweats becomes tamei. Says the Rosh, Mikol halein shamina. What do we see from all these dinim of tumah v'tara? The steam, or in cases like we were talking about, the sweat, is considered like the item that it's sweated from. The Rosh explains that from the case of the Mishnah concerning the laws of tumah v'tara, it seems that the steam from an impure source is given the status of that impure source. Therefore, the Rosh claims that the same principle should be applicable in the case of basar b'cholav inside of an oven. The steam that rises from a dairy dish on the bottom of the oven will penetrate the meat dish on top of it and render it forbidden. The Shulchan Aruch cites the Rosh and rules in accordance with his opinion. Machvas shel chalav, you have a dairy dish cooking in a pan. Shenosnu b'kira tachas k'der shel basar, you put it in the oven underneath a pot that's cooking meat. Hazeya ola v'nivla b'kedera, the steam rises and is absorbed by the pot, the osarta, and forbids the pot and what it contains. The Ramah limits the halacha to a case where the pan is uncovered. The milk dish was uncovered, and the pot is in sufficiently close proximity that the steam will still be quite hot when coming in contact with the meat pot. In that case specifically, the steam can rise naturally because steam rises, come in contact with the meat pot and the food inside, and therefore the steam is halachically equivalent to the actual dairy food. Says the Ramah, when the Shulchan Aruch ruled that it's usher, the Ramah is qualifying, reminding us that's when the dairy pan below it was uncovered. And the steam is rising from the food itself to the pot above it. The Gamayri Shu B'Korav Kol Kach, the pot's got to be pretty close to your pan below. So much Shayad Soletis B'Zeya B'Makom Shnogeh B'Kdera. Remember our concept of Yad Soletis Bo. That's about 114 degrees, where it's hot enough where there will be transfer. So the concern is, not the Ramah is qualifying that if it's a very large oven and the meat pot is very far away, proximity from this dairy pan, that the steam is not going to be Yad Soletis Bo. The steam is not going to be Yad Soletis Bo when it hits the pot. If the steam itself was not Yad Soletis Bo, then everything's permitted. So Rabbi Kiva Eger adds that even if the steam itself is not hot enough to qualify as Yad Soletis Bo, but if the meat pot is hot, when the steam reaches it, who cares that the steam is not hot? The pot's hot. The steam still renders the food in pot forbidden, right? As long as the pot itself is not hot from its own internal heat. So this is the fundament in the fundamental principles in this sugi of Zayah. Now, so far we have seen that Zayah can rise from a pot on the bottom of the oven and infiltrate a pot in the upper section of the oven, but it's not entirely clear, even from the sources we just learned, whether Zayah also condenses and returns to the bottom of the oven after being absorbed in the top of the oven. Meaning, does it now bring the meat stuff down below and aser? All the Shulchan Aruch said was we asered the meat pot above it because steam rises. But they didn't make any comment whether the meat dish, whether the milk pan below becomes aser. In other words, would it be forbidden to cook a meat dish in the oven and then later cook a dairy dish in the oven, because the zayah from the meat may later condense and fall back into the dairy dish. Meaning another problem, that if you cook, if the zayah, if we're worried about condensation, then if you have a meat dish in a pot in the oven and the steam rises and it condenses on the walls of the oven on the top, and then you cook a dairy dish afterwards, maybe that condenses, falls back into the dairy dish. The Dogel Mervava rules that this is indeed the case based on a ruling of Ramah and Siman 108. Says the Dogel Mervava, Hazeya Ola v'nivla b'kedera v'sarta. That when we're talking about the milk dish below the meat dish, the steam rose, it was absorbed in the pot and answered the pot and the food in it. And the dairy pan also becomes forbidden because the steam became forbidden because it mixed with the meat steam, came back down and answered the milk. Unless the pan steams from both of them. That's what the Ramah says, and here's the Ramah. Im afu otsolu isr veheter tachas machmas achas. You were baking or roasting a permitted food and a forbidden food that was uncovered underneath one pan, as long as they were all uncovered, megulin, asr afilu b'di'evit. So everything mixes and everything becomes asr, even b'di'evit. V'hu adinim afu b'chi hay gavna pas im basr. If you bake bread and in the same time you were baking meat, so the meat flavor, the zayah goes into the bread. Asr lachlo b'chalab. Such bread you wouldn't be able to eat with meat, with milk. Aval b'zachar zein lachush. But if you cook meat in an oven, and then later on you cook bread in it, there's no problem. Ela im ken hazayah machlis mishneya. Unless there was steam coming off of both of them. Das asr afilu b'zachar zeh. Im hayushnei megulim, as long as both were uncovered. It's like the same case when something usr falls on a lid of a pot that's hot. So the lid of the pot becomes usr because it's hot, and since it is in contact with the food in the pot, it all becomes usr. I'm just reading the footnote. The Ramah's discussion until the words, unless the pan gave off steam, is not focusing on the issue of zayah, but on a different issue called reicha. Reicha means an aroma. And there's a shaila whether reicha milsahi or lav milsahi. We paskin reicha lav milsahi. Aroma is nothing. The question of whether reicha is halachically significant is already dealt with by the Gemara and Psachim, and maybe somewhat more lenient than that of zayah, as evident from the ruling of the Ramah here, who holds that reicha is not applicable to two foods baked consecutively. The Ramah then adds that if steam was produced and the upper pan absorbs steams from a dairy pot underneath, then the steam may condense and forbids another meat pot placed underneath later as well, which is this shaila we asked before.
Ernie, it seems to me that if you do milk and meat one after the other, if the pots are uncovered, perhaps there should be a requirement to wipe down the inside of the oven.
So we're just beginning.
The vapor, I'm sure, clings to the walls of the inside of the oven.
So we're going to see four opinions regarding what Bernie just brought up. Regarding even if you don't have separate ovens for meat and dairy, how is it that we can cook consecutively meat and dairy or dairy and meat? How does it work? What do you have to do to avoid the problems that Bernie brought up, the problems that we just saw in halacha regarding the Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch? In addition to the potential problems caused by zayah from meat and dairy foods in one oven, a second concern with using one oven for meat and dairy is that actual meat or dairy food may spill in the oven. This may lead to a situation where actual dairy residue remains in the oven when a meat dish is being cooked there. or a situation where meat flavor is absorbed into the bottom of the oven or the racks. So based on these considerations, what are the practical guidelines for using an oven for meat and dairy? There are essentially four basic approaches taken by contemporary poskim to this question, and we will examine all four in detail. The Aruch HaShulchan and Rav Hershel Schachter. The Aruch HaShulchan is lenient. Now remember, before the Mishnah Brura in the mid-60s, I would say, became the Aruch HaShulchan was relied in America and even here in Europe since 1900. The Aruch HaShulchan passed away in 1910. The difference between the Aruch HaShulchan and the Mishnah Brura, the Aruch HaShulchan wrote on all Dalet Chelkei Shulchan Aruch. The Mishnah Brura is only on Orach Chaim. So the Aruch HaShulchan was a major posek that was relied upon by American European Jewry. The Aruch HaShulchan was lenient to allow cooking meat and dairy uncovered consecutively in more modern ovens, which are larger than ovens from the time of the Gemara and the Rishonim. He explains that the Zayah referred to by the Rosh and Shulchan Aruch was a very thick steam that resulted from their ovens being very small and enclosed. But that is not the case in our larger ovens, which have sufficient ventilation allowing the steam to exit. Says the Aruch HaShulchan in Yordeya, V'nei b'din Zayah, Mizbarer lanu m'mishnah d'machshirin d'lo shaykh Zayah b'mokam mukam. Zayah applies in an enclosed area, v'lo b'mokam golui, k'mo b'kira shakidera tachtona nesuna ba. Like if a lower pot is placed in an enclosed stove, there's plenty of space around it. V'aleh omed al yona, and then there's even racks above it. V'ole azeh saviv saviv. No, excuse me. He says v'lo b'makom golui. He's talking about the problem of Zayah was when there was not enough space. K'mo b'kira shakdera tachtona netuna ba v'aleh omed al yona. Right on top. For example, they used to put it right on top of the pots. The steam had no place to go out. But in our ovens, which have open space, there's air around it. And it doesn't answer the kedera that's near it. Now, Rav Chaim Jachter writes that Rav Hershel Schachter also adopts this approach as the practical halacha. According to the approach of Aruch HaShulchan, one would be permitted to cook milk and meat consecutively in the same oven, provided the oven is clean. The cleanliness of the oven eliminates the problem of reicha, and of course, if there were spills. And the fact that we do not cook in small confined areas removes the problems of Zayah. Rav Hershel Schachter routinely tells inquirers that they may adopt this approach. Rav Schachter reasons that the problem of Zayah applies only to Hebel, thick steam, which is an assertion supported by the Bir Agra, who was the Mishnah Brura himself. Rav Schachter counsels, however, that one should wait for the oven to cool down from dairy use before the meat use and vice versa. According to this approach, Zayah would only be present with the type of thick steam that sometimes appears when food or liquid spills on the bottom of the oven begins to burn. And Rav Yosef Kapak takes a similar approach in his commentary on the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. B'tanurei chashmal b'nei ta'achad, in an electric oven, which has one compartment, nearly sheheter gomerhu, la'afos behen gam bosar v'gam cholav k'muvan b'tapniot nifradot b'zachar zeh. You can cook milk and meat in different dishes consecutively, lo b'yachad. Somebody wants to have a chumrah, yachem es atan or kerava shabin tafshil tafshil. Heat up the oven for 15 minutes to burn off the reach. If you thought that the recha was absorbed in the walls. And no matter what, we're not worried about the recha, because recha halachically is lav nilson. The od, The wall of the oven is not coming in contact with the pot or the food. So this is the most lenient approach. That they basically allow you to cook dairy in the oven, and then afterwards to cook meat in the oven. Other poskim disagree with the relatively lenient approach described in this first approach. According to the second approach, one may not simply use the same oven for meat and dairy consecutively. Rather, one must do something to ensure that the zayah from the other type of food is no longer present. And that's the approach taken by Rav Ovadia Yosef, who holds that if one wishes to cook a dairy dish in a meat oven, one should wait 24 hours from the last time the oven was used for meat, so that any absorbed taste is no longer ben yomo, our old friend ben yomo. Since anything beyond 24 hours is livga, no sin tam livgam, and it doesn't aser, so he just says wait 24 hours. Then clean the oven to ensure that there's no actual meat residue remaining. One may subsequently turn on the oven to the highest setting for at least 20 minutes to kasher it, and replace the racks in case any food spilled on it. So that's the procedure of Rav Ovadia. Odot shelato bedin tanur, gas or tanur chashmali, either a gas oven or an electric oven. Shelafamim tzolim betocho basar o off, that meat or chicken was roasted there. V'roim az shatanu mismalei hevel v'zeh matzli. You can look in the oven, you can see there's a lot of steam rising. He was asked, after this episode where the oven was used for meat, can you later cook a cheesecake? Of course, in a different dish. He permits it if you wait 24 hours. As long as you use a dairy dish. 20 minutes, right? A third of an hour, you should turn it on to the highest setting. Any remaining zayah will be burnt off by heating up the oven that way. Here's an important statement of Rav Ovadia. He says people who rely on the Aruch HaShulchan that the Hershel Schachter was relying on, you don't have to protest. You have someone to rely on if you want to cook something even without waiting the 24 hours. Sheyesh lehem al ma sheyismachu. According to Rav Ovadia, turning on the oven to the highest setting is a valid method of kashering one's oven from meat to dairy, and may be used in order to cook both meat and dairy in the same oven. By the way, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein followed the same approach. The reason that one waits 24 hours is that this is the standard practice before kashering. You don't kasher a kli unless you leave it. You got to leave it alone for 24 hours. So since Rav Ovadia is recommending kashering, so that's basically where the 24 hours came in. To make sure that the oven is not ben yomo, so that there's no potential leftover meat flavor in the oven. And they remind us that we learned about all of this in volume 4. Nevertheless, Rav Ovadia acknowledged that those who kasher the oven within 24 hours also have a halachic basis upon which to rely. And this happens to be the position of Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, who holds that lechatchila one may kasher the oven within 24 hours of use, or wait 24 hours between uses without kashering the oven. So Rav Lichtenstein says if you wait 24 hours, you don't have to kasher. If you want to kasher, you can do it even within 24 hours. Although Rav Lichtenstein permits one to eat in a home where the opinion of the Aruch HaShulchan is followed, he recommends that one adopt a stricter standard. He suggests that one either wait 24 hours before cooking milk and meat in the same oven. It's reported that Rav Moshe Feinstein permitted this as well. Or kasher the oven between cooking milk and meat in the same oven within 24 hours. One kashers the oven for this purpose by cleaning it and letting it run for an hour at its maximum temperature. Rav Jachter explains that the grounds for leniency for simply waiting 24 hours are that the prohibition of using a dairy utensil to cook meat is only rabbinic if more than 24 hours have passed, since dairy was cooked on it. We've learned that before, that anything beyond 24 hours, if you put a hot meat dish on a milchdik plate, but the plate hadn't been used for milk for 24 hours, the food does not have to be thrown away. We have a minhag to kasher the dish, but that's only a minhag as a low plug. We're talking about as long as it can be kasher. So the prohibition of using a dairy utensil to cook meat is only rabbinic if more than 24 hours have passed, since dairy was cooked in it. Therefore, since the whole notion of zeya is also not as serious as actual transfer of taste of the food itself, one may be lenient. I'm reading the footnote. Another potential factor that would explain this leniency is that the food inside the oven never directly comes in contact with the oven itself. Plus, the scope of zeya is limited by many poskim. Therefore, one may be more lenient and simply wait 24 hours so that any absorbed taste embedded in the oven is no longer ben yomo and will not render food of the other type, i.e. milk to meat or meat to milk, treif, because it's beyond 24 hours. The logic for koshering the oven within 24 hours is that, strictly speaking, koshering through libun, which is using fire, may be performed within 24 hours of use. Though the custom is to be machmer, to leave things alone for 24 hours. But libun will work. And we're going to have later on in volume 5 all the laws of koshering. So we'll see that in detail, how libun works even without leaving something to sit for 24 hours. Once again, since the only issue is zeya, the food never touches the oven directly, there is room to be lenient. See Pnine Halacha, who believes that the practical halacha is in accordance with the approach that one may kasher the oven even within 24 hours. And even if a residue of food remains in the oven, since the heat will burn it out. And that's what Rav Lichtenstein states. Okay, the approach number 3, Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe takes an even stricter approach. In his view, one may not cook uncovered meat and dairy foods that contain zeya even consecutively. He holds that one would need to designate the oven as being dairy or meat and then cover the other type of food on a regular basis. It means he allows you to use the oven for the opposite. Let's say you declare your oven a meat oven. You're allowed to use dairy, but that the dairy has to be always covered. You would not be able to cook a dairy. Up until now, we've been learning that the cooking consecutively is an uncovered pot. When the Aruch HaShulchan said you can use it right after, you don't have to wait at all, we're talking about, and both are uncovered. But remember, you're using them consecutively. And the same thing with Rav Ovadia, we're talking about an uncovered. Rav Moshe does not allow you to cook the opposite min. Means if it's a meat oven, he does not allow you to cook a dairy thing uncovered in that oven, ever. It's always got to be covered. Or if your oven is a dairy oven and you want to cook something meat in there, you can, but it's got to be covered. That's Rav Moshe's stringency. Hinei b'tanrei agaz.
So would Rav Moshe hold that if you always had your food covered in the oven, the oven would then remain neutral? You could cook meat or milk in that oven without waiting 24 hours or kashing.
Yes, he if you always covered everything,
Right.
so l'chura, you still wouldn't do it together. I don't know anybody would allow to eat it together. But in consecutive, perhaps you're correct. If you covered it, and therefore no zeya arose, the oven would remain a neutral oven. So, but Rav Moshe says, in practically people cook their things in the oven uncovered. So you have to declare the oven as one. Let's say for most people, let's say you're going to make a steak, you don't cover a steak. A steak is cooked right under the broiler. So his concept is that that oven now is a meat oven. then if you're going to cook milk in it later on, you got to cover the milk dish. That's basically what Moshe is saying. Do we have a problem of zeh if you're going to cook an open meat dish, which would prohibit you from cooking a milk dish uncovered afterwards? If you see that there is steam, he does not allow you to cook open meat and open dairy one after another, even if you waited a month. He doesn't allow it. Rav Moshe. He's in doubt whether he were choishes generally for zeya. The lashon Ramah, the zachar zeh ein lachush, elim ken hazeh amachmas mishneim. That means Ramah didn't answer the zachar zeh only if you saw steam rising from both dishes. The azasar feel the zachar zeh imayushneim magul. Mashma de bestome ein lachush lezeh. Rav Moshe sees in the words of the Ramah that in general he's not worried about zeh. Elim ken yadua da zeh mishneim. You see for sure that steam is rising from both of them. Aval efshar de betanurim elu shesasumim begag. The kotlim vadai mezia shiyotunot shiyazia, but today's ovens, where the roofs and walls are sealed, they are going to produce zeh. So he says, he does not allow you to cook uncovered dishes. You can cook the meat. Once you've declared the oven to be meat, that one you could always cook uncovered. But if you're going to cook a dairy item in there, it's got to be covered. According to Rav Moshe, although it's true that the Ramah implies that we do not necessarily assume that steam is always produced, in today's ovens that have walls and a roof, there is usually steam, and we must be stringent. The footnote says, see also Rav Moshe, he elaborates on the issue of steam produced by foods cooked consecutively. He argues based on the Ramah in 108 that cooking meat and dairy or kosher non-kosher consecutively in one oven is problematic only if both foods produce steam. As when the steam rises to the top of the ovens, it also causes steam absorbed there to condense, become absorbed in the food. But as mentioned, Rav Moshe holds that most food in today's ovens are assumed to produce steam, with the exception of dry, solid foods. So Rav Moshe, though, is more lenient concerning dry foods, which he believes do not usually produce steam. Therefore, he permits placing an uncovered, totally dry dairy food in an oven, usually used for meat, unless one actually sees steam emerging from the oven. But if you don't see steam, you can put an uncovered, dry dairy food in the oven after you cook meat in it.
Oh, are we going to cover microwaves as well?
Yes, we will. Yes, we will. Yes, we will. I'm not sure we're going to get there tonight because this is a very, as you can see, a very detailed subject, but we're going to try to finish whatever we can, but microwaves will be covered. And it's fascinating halach about microwaves. In fact, when we study the sources. But we haven't finished regular ovens here. So, v'neim lo nisbashel b'tanu k'teres b'dover lach. If it's only dry foods, not moist, ela she'afu b'shel dvarim yeveshim, she'im ochlim below mashkim, ita b'prima godim, the zeyas ochlin eno oser, that if it's a solid, the zeya of a solid doesn't prohibit. Aval kasav b'loshen efsher mashma shemistapik ladina. But Rav Moshe sees in the Prima Godim that he was mesupik, he was in doubt. So the yavish mamish, but if it's really dry, mashma shalom mistapik klal, he was not in doubt. Umatir b'boru, and the Prima Godim permitted. The imkain, says Rav Moshe, ba'afu ubishlu rak dvarim yeveshim. If you're baking or cooking dry things, yesh lahatir l'didei b'zeh chazeh af be'zeh. You can consecutively cook even when there is steam. But if you see steam, you should be machmer. So he permits even an uncovered dairy dish to be cooked in a meat oven. Now, does one who follow this approach need to switch their racks when cooking the other type in the oven? Rav Binyamin Forst, who writes the Kashrus Art Scroll Sefer, notes that this issue is subject to machlokas, but offers a suggestion as to how to circumvent the question. Placing meat utensils on the same racks as dairy utensils poses no problem in itself. Taste cannot travel from utensil to utensil without the medium of liquid. Nevertheless, use of the same oven racks for meat and dairy pots can at times be problematic. Foods occasionally spill from pots while cooking in an oven, soiling the rack. Thus, one should be concerned lest the dairy pot be placed over meat residue on the rack. And of course, that becomes hot, and then the pot becomes usher, and the food inside becomes usher. Some contemporary authorities ruled that one may assume that any food residue on the rack has certainly dried and is no longer able to impart its taste to any pot placed upon it. However, other authorities contend that even if no meat residue is presently on the rack, dairy pots should not be placed on the rack. He says the Igros Moshe in an earlier section of the Tzurba quoted above in a footnote holds that the racks need not be switched, while the Minchas Yitzchak, the Dayan Weiss, the Satmar Dayan, holds that they should be switched. So that was a machlokas between America and Israel, because the Minchas Yitzchak Padskin in Yerushalayim, and that was one of the Rav Moshe did not feel that the racks have to be switched. However, other contend, right, should be played. That's the Minchas Yitzchak. Contact of hot meat and dairy pots is to be avoided even when no liquid is present. And one who wishes to avoid any question should treat his oven racks as either meat or dairy and spread aluminum foil over the rack whenever cooking pots of the other type. Now, there's a more stringent approach. The Tshuvas Van Hagos, who is the Rav Moshe Sternbuch, who is currently the posek in the Eidach Haredis. I've had the chus to meet him and ask him shaylas personally. The Badei HaShulchan is the major Achron who's still alive, who everyone studies Yoredeya with the Badei HaShulchan. He's like the Mishnah Brura, because there's no Mishnah Brura on Yoredeya. So the Badei HaShulchan is like the Mishnah Brura on the Yoredeya. I think he lives in Borough Park. Some poskim are even more stringent than Rav Moshe and do not recommend cooking dairy foods in a meat oven, even if they are covered. Means, according to this approach, you're going to have two different ovens. This is based on a comment of the Ramah to avoid having a meat and dairy pot come in contact with each other l'chatchila, even though the foods themselves are only found inside and do not mix with one another. So too, one should not allow steam from the meat oven to come in contact with the cover of a dairy dish. Let's say you have a pan that's covered. A kol shari. You have two pots, milk and meat. They touch each other. They don't answer each other. So the zeya shouldn't be worse than that. But we should be careful about all of this. According to Ksav Sofer, the reason for the Ramos stringency here is due to the concern that perhaps the food will not be covered properly. And the steam will rise without a barrier and transfer taste to the pot on top. So according to the group of poskim that adopt this type of approach, one should not use the same oven for both dairy and meat on a regular basis. We'll see, they'll allow it occasionally, but you should have two ovens. If, in general, you have separate ovens, and then he has a way to be machshir, like we explained, not using it for 24 hours, heating it. He would not rely on using this heter of kashering it if constantly you're switching back and forth. They're very concerned about accidents. You won't kasher it properly. By meat, there's usually fluid, and there's steam. person should buy 2 ovens, or marechas kfula, or a double oven. One on top, one on the bottom. So there's no steam passing from one oven to the other. Do a heater to prevent basar b'chalav. Rav Feivel Cohen, who's the author of the Bali HaShulchan, also praises those who make an effort to purchase 2 separate ovens for meat and dairy, and rules that even in the case of one oven, one should try to use separate grates for meat and dairy, which we saw seemed to be the most stringent approach. When you're gonna and when you cover it, you got to cover the meat, the milk thing, and use a separate rack. You should have a special grate for meat, the second grate for dairy. So that the milk kli will not absorb from the rack of the meat that might have basar in it. The be'ain, from maybe meat residue there. Put aluminum foil on the grate. Yaniach redid shel aluminum, right? Either use a different grate or put aluminum in kol makom matov. And then it brings us to microwaves, which we will start with next week. But I think we had a lot of information regarding ovens